If you move, you won't like what happens next, I whispered to myself, pressing my back against the cold marble wall of the grand foyer as the evening rain rattled against the tall windows like a drumline from another world. Every footstep echoed through the house, long and measured, heavy with a kind of authority that made the hair on my arms stand straight. My hands were clammy, the polishing cloth I'd been holding twisting in my grip as I tried to focus on anything other than the sound approaching. Vincent Black had returned, and the timing of his arrival was unpredictable, unannounced, and entirely terrifying. The scent of his cologne preceded him, sharp and musky, cutting through the faint vanilla aroma from the candles I had lit in a futile attempt to soften the tension, and I felt the weight of his presence before I even glimpsed him, a figure perfectly tailored in a black suit that seemed to swallow the dim light of the room. I crouched lower, eyes scanning the hallway, noticing the subtle shift of shadows as the recessed lighting flickered. The soft click of his polished shoes on the marble floor was like the measured beat of a predator, and my breath caught in my throat, shallow and fast. I had been alone, confident in the quiet routine of the house, believing that the night would pass without incident. Yet this sudden intrusion was enough to unravel every layer of composure I had painstakingly built over the hours. My gaze darted to the staircase where the dark banister gleamed under the chandelier, and I imagined him pausing there, surveying the house with a careful eye, every detail noted, every corner accounted for, as if the house itself was an extension of his will. I shifted slightly, just enough to reposition the bucket of cleaning supplies behind a tall plant, hoping it would obscure any telltale signs of movement, and whispered again, "Stay quiet." My voice barely more than a breath, a caution to myself as much as a warning to the air that trembled with his authority. The walls seemed to close in, the ticking of the clock amplifying in my ears, each second stretching into an eternity as I listened to the faint shuffle of papers, the subtle creak of floorboards settling under weight I could not see, yet knew was coming. My pulse thumped against my ribcage with a speed that made it difficult to concentrate, and I reminded myself to control the shaking in my fingers, to maintain the semblance of calm as the silence between us grew heavy, oppressive, a tangible thing pressing against the skin. I could feel his gaze even before I caught the flash of his eyes and the reflection of the polished surfaces, and my chest tightened, every instinct screaming that the smallest noise could betray my presence. I inched closer to the shadowed doorway, feeling the chill from the marble seep through my stockings, and I counted each heartbeat, imagining the consequences of a wrong move, a slip of the tongue, a glance in the wrong direction. There was an elegance to his threat, a precision in the way he commanded the space without speaking, yet every silent gesture carried the weight of expectation and power. The polished wood of the banister caught the faint light as I ran a finger along it for balance, trying to steady my racing thoughts, while outside the windows, the storm intensified, rain lashing the glass, wind rattling the frames, creating a symphony that seemed to underscore the tension inside. My eyes found the top of the staircase, anticipating him, and I felt the electric charge in the air as though the very atmosphere had thickened, making it harder to draw a full breath. Each small creak, each distant thump from upstairs seemed magnified, a countdown of moments until I would confront what I could not yet see but already feared, the weight of his presence suffocating yet compelling in a way that left me rooted to the spot, half frozen, half waiting, entirely aware that the house no longer belonged solely to me, but had become a stage for his authority, and the only movement permitted was that which he allowed, leaving me in the uneasy limbo between fear and fascination, every sense acutely aware, every nerve straining. The phrase "stay quiet," a mantra against the storm within and without, as I crouched there, the marble cool beneath my palms, and listened to the footsteps growing closer, realizing that nothing in my careful night routine had prepared me for the intensity of his return and the reason behind it that would soon, inevitably, shatter the quiet of the house and the rhythm of my breath. The soft click of the grand foyer door echoed against the marble as Vincent moved further into the house, each measured step revealing the precision of a man accustomed to commanding every space he entered. Emily remained crouched near the large fern by the staircase, her breath shallow, the faint scent of rain from outside mingling with the lingering aroma of polished wood and candle wax. Her eyes followed him, tracing the angles of his shoulders, the curve of his jaw, the intensity in his ice-blue eyes that seemed to see beyond the physical into the smallest cracks of her composure. She forced her hands to remain still, keeping them pressed against the cool surface of the marble floor, aware that any sudden movement might draw attention, yet simultaneously fascinated by the calculated rhythm of his presence. The house, so familiar and comforting in daylight, transformed under the dim glow of chandelier light, and the storm outside into a labyrinth of shadows and uncertainty, and Emily felt each heartbeat amplify the sense of suspense that wrapped around her like a cloak. Vincent paused near the staircase, the light catching the fabric of his tailored jacket in a way that made it appear almost liquid, black folding into shadows, and Emily imagined him taking in every detail of the house, cataloging what was out of place, noting every subtle clue of activity in his absence. The seconds stretched, elastic, and Emily found herself imagining the storm outside as a drumbeat for the tension inside, rain pelting the windows, the soft hum of distant thunder like a reminder that the world beyond the foyer continued even as time seemed suspended in the space between their awareness of each other. Her eyes flicked toward the staircase, wondering if he had already scanned every corner, whether his awareness extended to the smallest detail of her existence, her choices, the way she had moved through the halls when she believed she was alone. Vincent tilted his head slightly, not directly at her, but in a way that suggested he was perceiving the environment as though it were an extension of himself, every shadow a potential threat, every reflective surface a mirror of control. Emily adjusted her position, inching slightly closer to the shadow of the stairwell, a calculated risk that allowed her to observe him without fully exposing herself. She felt the chill of the marble seep through the soles of her shoes, grounding her awareness, heightening her senses, making her hyper-aware of the faintest whisper of movement, the subtlest change in the rhythm of the house. The gentle tapping of his polished shoes on marble drew her attention repeatedly, a pattern that seemed to communicate a silent language, one she felt compelled to decipher without moving from her concealed vantage. She recalled the earlier moments of her shift, the routine of cleaning and organizing that had lulled her into a false sense of security, and she recognized now how fragile that illusion had been, how quickly the familiar could become unpredictable under the influence of presence and authority. Vincent stopped, momentarily still, his gaze sweeping the foyer as if confirming that every item was in its proper place. And Emily took in the precise angle of his posture, the subtle tension in his hands, the calm power in the way he occupied the space without needing to speak. Her own body mirrored the tension she perceived, each muscle poised, every nerve alert, a delicate dance of concealment and observation, and she found herself focusing on small details. The way his cufflinks caught the light, the faint crease of his trousers where movement had been absorbed, the subtle glint in his eyes that betrayed awareness beyond the physical. She pressed her back further against the wall, grounding herself against the cold, inhaling a slow, measured breath as she watched him, trying to maintain composure while feeling an almost magnetic pull toward the calculated control he exuded. The storm outside intensified, the patter of rain against the windows creating a rhythm that synchronized with her heartbeat, and for a moment, Emily allowed herself to imagine the narrative of the house under his scrutiny, the balance of control and surrender, the interplay of knowledge and secrecy. She adjusted the position of her hands once more, ensuring they rested on the smooth marble without betraying the tremor she felt internally, and she silently reminded herself that the next few minutes would define the boundary between her careful concealment and the revelation of her presence. Vincent moved again, a step toward the staircase, his head tilting slightly as though listening to the unspoken language of the house, and Emily realized that every shadow, every reflective surface, every subtle shift in the room was being cataloged by him, a silent measure of her awareness and restraint. The anticipation coiled tighter within her chest as she observed, and she understood that the house was no longer just her domain, but a stage upon which his presence dictated the rhythm, the tension, and the next set of actions. She focused on the gentle flutter of the curtains stirred by a draft from the slightly open window, the reflection of his eyes catching in the polished wood, and she felt the electric charge of being simultaneously concealed and observed, her mind racing to predict his next movement while appreciating the meticulous power in the stillness that preceded it. The faint hum of the chandelier above mingled with the sound of rain, creating a rhythm that seemed to pulse through the grand hall, and Emily could not help but notice the way the polished floor reflected every movement, capturing even the smallest shadow of Vincent as he moved with deliberate intent. She had shifted slightly, ensuring the large fern partially obscured her presence, but the slightest glint of light caught on the marble, reminding her that concealment was never complete, that he might already be aware of her exact location without needing to see her directly. Vincent paused near the center of the foyer, hands resting lightly at his sides, his posture relaxed yet commanding, conveying an ease of power that seemed natural and unshakable, and Emily's gaze could not leave him, drawn as much by the subtle energy of authority as by the curiosity that pricked at the edges of her fear. Her mind raced, cataloging every detail. The curve of his jaw, the faint crease near his eyes, the way his movements suggested confidence and control, the quiet awareness that he understood the space and everyone within it in a way that was almost preternatural. She adjusted her grip on the polishing cloth in her hand, feeling the texture against her fingers, grounding herself in the tactile, while the storm outside hammered against the tall windows with increased intensity, each drop sending a sharp rhythm into her awareness that seemed to mirror the tightening coil of anticipation within her chest. Vincent's head tilted slightly, and Emily caught the barest hint of a smile that did not reach his eyes, a subtle acknowledgement of the tension in the space, and she found herself holding her breath, acutely aware of every sound. The soft creak of the floorboards beneath his weight, the faint rustle of the curtains stirred by the draft from the slightly open window, the distant low roll of thunder that seemed synchronized with the storm of nerves racing through her own system. Her focus narrowed to small, manageable details, the angle of the reflection in the polished banister, the way the light hit the surface of the marble, the shadowed contours of the stairwell, and with each passing second, the anticipation grew, the potential for discovery or revelation coiling tighter with a subtle, yet undeniable pull. She reminded herself to control the quiver of her fingers, to slow her breathing, to remain as composed as possible, even as every instinct screamed that she had only seconds to prepare for the next move, that the boundaries of her routine had been irrevocably altered by his presence. Vincent shifted again, a small movement, yet it conveyed more than any words could, a signal of attention, of appraisal, and Emily felt the energy of the room bend around him, the house itself seeming to recognize his authority, to adjust, to respond to his command. She pressed herself closer to the shadow of the staircase, using the low lighting to her advantage, feeling both hidden and hypervisible at once, acutely aware that the smallest detail of her posture, her breathing, the tilt of her head, could communicate volumes in the silent exchange of presence. The rain intensified outside, drumming against the window panes, blending with the faint creak of the old house settling, and Emily's senses were stretched taut, every nerve alive to the possibility of movement, the presence of power, the subtle shift of intention in the room. Vincent's gaze seemed to sweep the space again, almost imperceptibly, yet Emily felt it like a weight pressing lightly against her, guiding her thoughts, heightening her awareness, compelling her to anticipate, to adapt, to measure every action. She noted the rhythm of his movements, a silent cadence of authority, and tried to align her own awareness with it, to become a shadow within a shadow, a presence that could observe without being fully perceived. Each passing second built upon the last, creating a tension that was almost palpable, and Emily found herself balancing on the edge of calm and alertness, knowing that the next moments would reveal intentions, boundaries, and perhaps a subtle truth about the reason for his sudden return, all while the storm outside mirrored the storm of anticipation within, a relentless, driving force that made every breath, every heartbeat, and every flicker of movement carry weight and significance beyond the ordinary. Emily's eyes flicked to the ornate clock on the wall, the second hand moving with a deliberate, almost accusatory tick, each movement marking the passage of time she felt slipping through her fingers. Vincent remained near the center of the foyer, his stance unwavering, his gaze scanning the intricate details of the house, as though he were mapping every corner, every shadow, every reflection of light to a mental grid that only he could decipher. The storm outside intensified, the rain pelting the tall windows with a staccato rhythm, the occasional rumble of distant thunder adding a weight to the charged atmosphere inside, and Emily felt the pulse of the house syncing with her own, a heartbeat measured in fear, anticipation, and the awareness of observation. She adjusted her position slightly, moving just enough to peer around the large fern without revealing herself, her fingers brushing against the cool marble as if grounding herself in its solidity, while the rest of her awareness remained suspended on the subtle movements of Vincent's figure. He paused, a slight tilt of his head suggesting attention, a silent acknowledgement that he sensed more than he let on, and Emily felt a chill run through her, the realization that the balance of control in this space was delicate, measured, and entirely dictated by the presence of this man who could fill the room without making a single sound. Her eyes caught the glint of his cufflinks in the dim light, a small but precise detail that spoke of meticulous care, and she wondered what other subtleties he noticed, what patterns he read in the quiet motions of the house, the arrangement of furniture, the smallest sign of movement that indicated her presence. The air was heavy, scented faintly with wax and polished wood, the storm lending a raw freshness that mingled with the controlled environment within, and Emily held her breath, noticing the faint tension in her shoulders, the slow, deliberate exhalation that tried to mimic calm even as her pulse raced in tandem with the silent rhythm of Vincent's survey of the space. She focused on the interplay of light and shadow across the marble floor, each reflection a small map of where she had moved, each faint shimmer a potential indicator of her location, and she calculated the distance between herself and him, the timing of each step, the subtle shifts in posture that might reveal intent without words. Vincent's gaze shifted slightly, and Emily felt the weight of his attention like a tangible thing pressing gently against the space between them, compelling her to remain motionless, to observe, to anticipate. The storm outside became a backdrop to the more intimate storm of observation. The way the curtains fluttered in a small draft from the open window, the faint tick of the clock, the quiet settling of the house itself, all combining into a symphony that heightened her senses and sharpened her focus. She traced the lines of the staircase, imagining the angles he might be calculating, the way his presence filled the room and created a rhythm that demanded her complete awareness, and she allowed herself a slow, measured inhale, letting the cool marble beneath her fingertips anchor her even as her mind raced to interpret every gesture, every nuance, every unspoken communication. Vincent moved again, his steps deliberate, precise, carrying the quiet authority of a man accustomed to commanding the world around him without need for excess, and Emily felt the pull of that authority in her chest, a tension between fear and fascination that left her simultaneously alert and oddly centered. She adjusted her position once more, ensuring that she remained in shadow, observing the rhythm of his movements, noting the faintest cues that might indicate intent, planning her own careful motions while remaining invisible, and she realized that every second that passed heightened the stakes, drawing her deeper into a heightened awareness of space, presence, and the subtle, unspoken dialogue that played out between them in silence. The rain continued its relentless pattern against the windows, the house settling into a quiet resonance that vibrated in her chest, and Emily allowed herself a single thought, that the balance of this night, this moment, rested entirely on her ability to remain composed, to observe without revealing, and to navigate the presence of a man whose authority shaped the air itself, making every breath, every heartbeat, every flicker of movement carry significance beyond the ordinary. The subtle shift in Vincent's posture caught Emily's attention, a minuscule movement that suggested he was adjusting his focus, redirecting his awareness towards something beyond the immediate room, and she felt the quiet thrill of anticipation mixed with anxiety coiled tightly in her chest. The chandeliers above scattered faint pools of light across the polished marble floor, the reflections stretching and shifting with every careful step he took, and Emily found herself tracing those reflections with her eyes, imagining the way he might perceive them as markers of presence or absence, a silent survey of everything that fell under his control. Her hands rested lightly against the smooth marble, grounding her, even as her mind raced to anticipate his next action, the rhythm of his movements acting like a metronome to her heightened senses. Outside, the rain continued to drum insistently against the tall windows, the sound a constant backdrop that echoed the tension within, each patter a reminder of the storm that had been building long before his arrival and seemed now to echo in the very pulse of the house. Emily adjusted her position, shifting just enough to keep the fern between them while allowing her to observe, each motion deliberate, precise, a negotiation with the silent authority that Vincent exuded effortlessly. She noticed the subtle angles of his shoulders, the tilt of his head as he surveyed the hall, the faint light catching in his eyes in a way that made them seem both piercing and contemplative, assessing every possibility with an uncanny calm. The house, familiar and comforting under normal circumstances, now felt alive with potential, every shadow a marker, every reflective surface a hint of revelation, and Emily felt the weight of responsibility to remain unseen, to preserve the delicate equilibrium that allowed her to observe without revealing herself. Vincent's gaze lingered briefly toward the far end of the hall, then swept back, and Emily felt a shiver of realization that he was not merely surveying the house for physical anomalies, but was attuned to the subtler signals. The way the air shifted, the soft vibrations of the floor, the slight movement of objects that might betray presence. She inhaled slowly, deliberately, the cool marble beneath her fingers steadying her racing heartbeat, her awareness narrowing to the interplay of sound, light, and shadow, a sensory web that allowed her to track his position without betraying her own. The distant rumble of thunder added a weight to the charged atmosphere, a low resonance that seemed to harmonize with the pulse of tension growing between them, and Emily found herself acutely aware of the rhythm in the small details. The sway of the curtains in the draft from the open window, the faint reflection of light on the polished surfaces, the subtle pattern of shadows cast by the staircase banister. Every small detail became a signal, every shift a potential revelation, and she focused intently on maintaining her composure, her movements precise, her breathing controlled, each inhalation a measured effort to align herself with the silent cadence set by Vincent's presence. He moved again, a step forward, and the subtle sound of his polished shoes against marble seemed amplified in the stillness, a precise beat in the symphony of observation that demanded her full attention. Emily adjusted her position slightly, ensuring that her shadow remained merged with the dimly lit stairwell, and felt the electric tension of anticipation tighten further, the awareness that the next moments could redefine the balance of the evening. The rain outside intensified, the sound becoming a percussive undertone to the quiet intensity within, and she felt the charged air of the foyer wrap around her, the interplay of observation, concealment, and anticipation stretching time into long, deliberate seconds. She allowed her senses to expand fully, noting every flicker of light, every faint sound, the slight vibrations through the floor beneath her shoes, as Vincent's silent authority dominated the space, the tension between them like a taut wire vibrating with potential energy, and Emily understood that the subtle dance of presence and observation would define the next phase of the night, the delicate balance of perception, control, and awareness holding her on the edge of alert, ready for the revelation that awaited. Emily's attention sharpened as Vincent's gaze lingered on a small detail near the staircase, the subtle shift in his focus making her pulse quicken, each beat a drum of alertness and anticipation. The chandelier overhead cast a soft, golden glow that bounced off the polished marble, illuminating the intricate patterns of the floor and the long shadows of the house, stretching and curling like living tendrils that seemed to respond to the presence of authority in the room. Her fingers remained pressed lightly against the cool surface of the marble, grounding her while her mind cataloged every movement, every minute shift in posture, every faint micro-expression that flickered across his composed features. Outside, the storm had reached a crescendo, rain lashing the windows with increased intensity, the occasional gust rattling the frames and sending a shiver of awareness through Emily, her senses hyper-focused on the interplay of sound, shadow, and movement within the grand hall. Vincent moved deliberately, a slow step forward that seemed to command the rhythm of the space, his ice-blue eyes scanning the room with an uncanny precision, noting every reflection in the polished surfaces, every shadow that hinted at hidden presence. And Emily felt both the weight and the pull of his authority, a magnetic tension that anchored her in place while simultaneously heightening her awareness. She allowed herself to breathe slowly, deliberately, focusing on the subtle cues, the slight shift of his shoulders, the tilt of his head as he registered the faintest changes in the environment, the way his posture communicated control without overt action. The air seemed charged, dense with expectation, each inhalation of scented wax and polished wood mingling with the freshness of rain to create a sensory tapestry that pulled her deeper into heightened perception. Emily adjusted her stance, ensuring that she remained concealed behind the fern while maintaining a full view of his movements, every sense alert to the silent language of observation and intention. Vincent paused, the slight tightening of his jaw the only indication of his focus, and she felt the tension coil further, the realization that his awareness extended beyond what she could see, that he measured presence and intent in ways that were invisible yet undeniable. The faint ticking of the ornate clock above punctuated the moment, each second stretching with deliberate gravity as the storm outside mirrored the storm of anticipation inside, the rhythm of rain a percussive accompaniment to the silent exchange of attention and awareness. Her gaze swept across the reflective surfaces, the intricate patterns of the marble, the angles of the staircase, each element a marker in a mental map that Vincent seemed to navigate effortlessly, and Emily felt the delicate balance of concealment and observation tighten, the electricity of the moment threading through every nerve. She moved just slightly, adjusting her weight to remain hidden while refining her line of sight, noting the subtle interplay of light and shadow, the gentle sway of the curtains in the draft, the glint of his cufflinks, all feeding into a heightened awareness of presence and proximity. Vincent's next step was deliberate, precise, a rhythm that seemed to orchestrate the tension in the room, guiding Emily's movements and focus, shaping the space with authority and intent. She felt the weight of observation pressing lightly yet insistently, a force that demanded acute attention and careful anticipation, and she aligned her own breath and posture with the silent cadence, every fiber of her being attuned to the rhythm of his authority. The storm outside roared, wind lashing against the windows, but within the house, the tension was more immediate, more intimate, charged with anticipation and the subtle interplay of presence and awareness, each second stretching with a quiet intensity that held Emily poised on the edge of perception and reaction, ready for whatever revelation or movement might next unfold in the space controlled by Vincent's commanding presence. Emily's chest tightened as a soft click resonated from the far end of the hallway, a subtle but deliberate sound that made her awareness spike, each sense alert to the faintest movement, the smallest hint of intention. The storm outside roared with renewed force, rain hammering the tall windows and wind rattling the panes, yet inside the foyer, the tension felt almost tangible, a pulse in the air that responded to Vincent's presence as if the house itself acknowledged his authority. She shifted slightly, adjusting her position behind the fern, careful not to disturb a single leaf, her fingertips brushing the cool marble beneath her as she centered herself, every muscle primed to react to the next subtle cue. Vincent's gaze swept over the hall again, a slow, measured scan that seemed to absorb every detail. The gleam of the polished floor, the shadows cast by the staircase, the reflections of light from the chandelier that traced a path across the space. Emily noticed the slight narrowing of his eyes, the subtle tilt of his head, and she realized that his awareness extended far beyond the physical, into the rhythm of the room, the unspoken patterns of presence and absence. The air smelled faintly of wax and polished wood, mixed with the fresh scent of rain infiltrating through the slightly open window, creating a sensory layering that heightened every perception she had, every heartbeat echoing the rhythm of the storm and the silent cadence of observation between them. Her eyes followed him as he moved a single step forward, the polished surface of the marble reflecting a precise shadow of his silhouette, and Emily could feel the quiet intensity of his presence pressing against her awareness, guiding her focus, tightening the space between observation and anticipation. She inhaled slowly, counting each breath, allowing herself to absorb the scene with careful mindfulness, noting the subtle interplay of light, shadow, and movement, and how each small detail could convey information, intent, and the weight of authority without a single word spoken. Vincent paused again, his posture commanding yet composed, and Emily felt the almost magnetic pull of his energy, the way his presence seemed to structure the environment around him, influencing not only the physical space but the very perception of time, making each second stretch with heightened significance. The chandeliers above cast fragmented reflections across the hall, shifting with his movements, and she noticed the glint of his cufflinks, the meticulous tailoring of his suit, the fluid precision of his gestures, all of which seemed to communicate control, observation, and awareness. Her pulse thumped in tandem with the storm outside, synchronized to the subtle rhythm of his steps, the faint creak of the floorboards, the whisper of air through the slightly open windows, and the occasional flicker of light across the reflective surfaces. Emily adjusted her stance, shifting just enough to maintain concealment while refining her view, the tension coiling in her chest as she measured every action, every breath, every glance. She noted the subtle changes in the shadows, the way light bent around the polished surfaces, the depth of the reflections, and the faint resonance of his attention even when he was not looking directly at her. Vincent's presence filled the foyer with a silent authority, a quiet rhythm that demanded attentiveness, observation, and precision. Emily felt the energy in the room thrum with the unspoken dialogue of control, awareness, and anticipation, each element of the house, each sound, each shadow, each reflection woven into a tapestry that dictated the pace and focus of her movements. She breathed slowly, aligning herself with the cadence he set, aware that the next moments would reveal subtle shifts, the reasons behind his sudden presence, and the delicate balance of power, attention, and awareness that bound the space and the interaction in a tense, unbroken current of observation and anticipation. Emily's heart raced as Vincent's attention shifted subtly, a micro-movement of his shoulders signaling that he had noticed something, yet she could not discern what had drawn his focus. The storm outside pressed against the tall windows, rain streaking the glass in shimmering patterns that reflected the soft chandelier light onto the polished marble, turning the foyer into a canvas of shifting shadows and gleaming highlights. She adjusted her stance behind the fern, fingertips grazing the cool marble, grounding herself while keeping her eyes locked on his movements, noting the meticulous way he measured the space, every detail catalogued and weighed with precision. Vincent took a slow step forward, his polished shoes making a faint, deliberate sound against the marble floor, each movement commanding the rhythm of the room, the silent tension vibrating through the air and settling into Emily's chest. She could feel the weight of his presence, an invisible pressure that guided her awareness, sharpened her senses, and demanded that she move with calculated subtlety, every shift, every breath synchronized to the cadence of observation he imposed. The chandelier above threw fragmented reflections across the walls, catching in the facets of his cufflinks, the tailored lines of his suit, and the steady, deliberate motions of his hands, and Emily tracked each glint, each subtle play of light, as a marker for the flow of attention, aware that his awareness extended beyond what was visible into the rhythm and patterns of the space itself. Her fingers pressed into the marble floor, cool and grounding, as she adjusted her weight slightly, minimizing noise, refining her line of sight, and absorbing the interplay of shadows, reflections, and subtle vibrations from the storm outside, the pulse of the rain synchronizing with the quiet thrum of anticipation that filled the house. Vincent paused, a slight tilt of the head, the faintest narrowing of the eyes, a calculated gesture that conveyed observation, assessment, and authority all at once, and Emily felt the subtle coil of tension tighten further, her muscles poised, her awareness stretched to its limits, the space between them charged with unspoken expectation. She noted the patterns of light and shadow across the polished floor, the gentle sway of curtains stirred by a draft from the open window, the precise lines of the staircase banister reflecting the chandelier glow, and she realized that the house itself had become a canvas upon which the silent dialogue of power, attention, and presence was painted, each stroke invisible yet perceptible in the heightened awareness of the room. Every breath she took was measured, slow, and deliberate, each heartbeat synchronized with the rhythm imposed by Vincent's movements, and she allowed herself to focus on the small details, the angle of light across the walls, the faint echo of his footsteps, the subtle tension in the air, as a way to navigate the delicate balance of concealment and observation. The storm outside intensified, rain hammering with a relentless rhythm, yet inside, the foyer was alive with a quieter, denser tension, a charged energy that wrapped around Emily, anchoring her while simultaneously drawing her attention forward, deeper into the space controlled by his presence. She shifted again, careful, deliberate, ensuring the fern continued to obscure her while granting a view of every measured motion he made, every shift in posture or gaze, each conveying intention, control, and anticipation. Vincent's subtle movements orchestrated the tempo of the room, his silent command evident in the way shadows stretched, light shifted, and the air seemed to hum with tension, and Emily felt herself drawn fully into the careful awareness required to maintain balance, to observe without revealing, and to anticipate the revelation, the subtle reason for his sudden return, that lingered in the charged atmosphere, waiting for the precise moment it would unfold. Emily's breath caught as a sudden stillness fell over the foyer, the storm outside now a steady background rhythm rather than a pounding presence, and she felt the charged air of anticipation settle into a quiet tension that made each heartbeat resonate with heightened awareness. Vincent stood near the center of the hall, his posture relaxed yet impossibly commanding, every detail of the room seemingly absorbed into his consciousness, from the faint flicker of light against the polished marble to the subtle angle of the staircase banister reflecting the chandelier glow. She shifted slightly, adjusting her position to maintain concealment while allowing her eyes to track the precise movements of his hands, the slight tilt of his head, the careful sweep of his gaze across every surface, every shadow, as if measuring and recording the space in an unspoken dialogue of presence and control. The soft rustle of the curtains in the draft from the open window added a delicate rhythm to the scene, a whisper of sound that Emily noted alongside the gentle tick of the ornate clock above, each second stretching with weight and significance as her senses remained attuned to the interplay of light, sound, and observation. Vincent's eyes lingered briefly on a reflective surface near the staircase, a micro-expression of recognition that suggested he had noticed something previously undetected, and Emily felt the pull of tension tighten in her chest, the unspoken understanding of his awareness radiating through the space. She pressed her fingertips lightly against the marble, the cool surface grounding her while every nerve remained alert, every muscle poised to react, every sense magnified by the silent cadence of authority he imposed. The polished floor gleamed under the chandelier, the reflections shifting with each subtle movement, and Emily tracked them, noting how the light captured fragments of his presence, the angles and nuances conveying intention, observation, and control in a language she could feel but not hear. A gentle sigh escaped her lips, controlled and measured, as she allowed herself to synchronize with the rhythm of the room, to breathe in tandem with the silent energy that Vincent emanated, a cadence that dictated her own movements, her focus, her awareness, and the delicate negotiation of concealment and perception. The storm outside continued to hum, the rain's steady beat now harmonizing with the internal pulse of tension, each drop striking the windows with a resonance that mirrored the intricate, unspoken dialogue between presence, space, and observation. Emily noticed the subtle play of shadows across the walls, the flicker of light in the polished surfaces, the slight reflection in the chandelier crystals, each detail a silent signpost in the careful map of awareness that Vincent navigated so effortlessly, and she felt herself drawn into the depth of his perception, the quiet power of his attention, the way his presence made every ordinary detail carry extraordinary weight. She adjusted her position again, carefully, incrementally, to ensure she remained unseen while fully observing, feeling the silent current of energy in the room as a tangible force pressing lightly against her, guiding her awareness, shaping her perception, and heightening her anticipation. Vincent shifted, a deliberate, precise movement, his gaze lifting to meet hers for a fraction of a second, the brief connection electric, charged with unspoken understanding, a subtle acknowledgement of awareness and presence that left Emily's chest tight, her pulse racing, and her mind acutely aware that the balance of this night, this moment, rested on the fine edge of attention, control, and the revelation poised to emerge from the quiet authority that Vincent commanded so completely.